So welcome to this 7 Insider event on the state of visual storytelling, state of visual journalism in China. It's fantastic to have Yan Cong, Beimeng Fu, and Ye Charlotte Ming with us. Yan is a researcher and visual storyteller based in Amsterdam. She's previously worked as a photojournalist and video producer in Beijing for 6 years. Beimeng is a senior producer at Sixth Tone and is based in Shanghai. And Charlotte is a freelance journalist and photo editor currently based in Berlin in Germany. One of the things that we really try to do here on Insider is to break out of a focus on Europe, North America, the global north, and appreciate the diversity of visual traditions and visual reporting from around the world. And I was very, very keen once I came across, thanks to Sharon Lovell, who's in the audience, once I came across the Substack newsletter that Charlotte, Beimeng, and Yan have put together, which is keeping us abreast of developments around visual storytelling and visual journalism in China. So I thought it was a fantastic opportunity to have them on to talk about the newsletter, talk about work that excites them, and discuss what's happening in the visual storytelling space in China. So Yan, I think you're going to begin. Tell us a little bit about the newsletter itself, Far and Near, which is on Substack, and how you came to put it together and what you're hoping to achieve with it.
Yeah, so you guys can see my screen now, right?
Correct.
Okay. Awesome. So the three of us, like David just introduced, we run this newsletter on Substack called Far and Near. And I will start with a brief introduction of the work we do. And later, Beimeng will talk about our editorial process. And then after that, we will go into more of just the look at the photojournalism and video journalism, and also just visual on social media broadly in China today. So as Far and Near, we are a Substack newsletter that was launched last May. We are mostly publishing monthly, and we highlight the best story created and published by Chinese visual journalists, artists, and filmmakers. And we also publish Q&A and special issues, which also allows us to go behind the scenes with the visual storytellers in China, and also take deep dive on trendy topics on the Chinese internet visual culture. So here are some screenshots of our past issues. The first one is a regular curation issue, and this one, the second one in the middle, is a Q&A with visual artist Chen Ronghui. And the last one is a special issue in which we curated a list of Ukrainian photographers to follow right after the war broke out, and also did a deep dive on the chain woman story, which I will also talk about later in the presentation today. So we, when we set up Far and Near as a newsletter last year, actually we have already written a column introducing photojournalism from China for a few years. And here we're also very grateful that David has been a supporter of our works back then. And Beimeng also used to run a newsletter called No Talking Head, which is about nonfiction video and documentary films from China. And here I would like to focus on the mission of Far and Near. So first of all, we started Far and Near because we think there are something lacking in the industry now. Mainly 2 points. First of all, as people, the three of us, we are born and raised in China. We think we don't see enough of our lived experience in China reflected in foreign media's coverage. And of course, this is a very complicated issue because there are also very specific challenges foreign media they're facing in China nowadays. But we still also think there are problems with the so-called international reporting. And we think there should be more stories that reveal what it feels like to live in China, what a regular person actually care about, besides all the abstract economic numbers or politics or policies. And secondly, I think this problem has been talked about within the industry for a few years now, which is the lack of representation of a diverse profile of photographers in the industry. And for what we are focusing on here, of course, we think there's still a lack of representation of Chinese photographers in the industry globally. So it's based on these two problems that we identified that we hope Far and Near can, first of all, build a more nuanced understanding of China through local photographers or local visual storytellers' perspectives. And we know that sometimes the problem is because of language barrier or access issues. So we hope through our curation and translation and interviews, we can help English-speaking audience to be able to find work from published by Chinese visual storytellers or Chinese publications a little bit easier. And secondly, we also hope to amplify the voices of local Chinese talents and to promote diversity and equality in the industry through our small newsletter. And yeah, so I guess our intended audience might be just everyone in the audience today that is people who are interested in China and or people who are interested in visual storytelling. And I'm going to hand it over to Beimeng to talk about our editorial process working on the 3 types of issues.
Just before Beimeng starts, Yan, do you want to say something about the name of the newsletter? What's the name trying to capture with the idea of far and near?
Well, I'll start, and Charlotte and Beimeng, please also add what you think about it. I think when we first came up with this name, it started from the Chinese name, which is a literal translation of far near. From the very technical perspective of taking photos, when you're focusing, it's this process of like zooming in and zooming out that that helps you focus. So we think this idea of far and near is very, it connects from the very technical side of photography to the more abstract idea of, you know, bringing a story that's far away to home, or or telling the story home that's to someone that's very far away. Do you have anything to add, Charlotte and Beimeng?
I think you explained it really well. I think initially for us, because at the time when we started our first curation for our previous column, I was based in New York and went back to Beijing after we studied together. So it's kind of us, you know, talking about our lived experiences in different countries, and also how, you know, people try to understand another country through the media coverage, and it's sort of, and we are sort of the in-between people who are translating and trying to bridge this understanding for our audiences. So that's kind of the meaning behind the name.
And thank you, David, for asking the question, because we did spend a lot of time getting together virtually to decide upon this name. We actually came up with quite a few other options until we decided to get back to our original name, which is Far and Near.
Okay, so Beimeng, you're going to talk a little bit about video.
Sure. No, so we haven't finished introducing the newsletter yet. So with my part, for now, I'll be talking about how we actually come up with the ideas for each issues. And so Yan has briefly introduced our newsletter, and I will be breaking down our different types of issues and introducing a few active industry players to those of you who aren't as familiar about Chinese visual journalism industry as those of us who have worked here or in the area. So our most regular type of issue is our curational issues, and we usually highlight about 2-3 main picks and a few other stories that have been published in the prior months. So for example, with the first logo, if Yan could help click onto it, this is a short documentary publisher called Arrow Factory Doc, and it's one of our most frequently featured Chinese outlets. So yes, this video was made by Arrow Factory a few years ago, and it was really well done about popular online live streamer. So with Arrow Factory Doc, their early styles and approaches were inspired by the American outlet Great Big Story, as shared with us by one of their producers in this QA issue. And then another favorite outlet from us is Caixin. So Caixin is an independent news outlet known for their investigative journalism, who also employ some of the best visual journalists in the country. So for example, this photo right here is from Caixin, and it's about, life along China's frontline. Yeah, we're just showing it. So those of you who haven't subscribed have a sense of the kind of stories that we highlight, and then I'll break down our selection criteria. And the last outlet that I'm gonna have you quickly look at is Six Tone. So Six Tone is an English language news website whom I currently actually work for, that is one of the last to still supports documentary style photography and video journalism. So this story that we are looking at here was quite well received on Twitter and other platforms about this local little beer house that accepted people from very poor economic background to spend time day and night and give them a home-like environment. Yeah. So our selection criteria are as followed. So we can get back to the next page. Yes. So we value nuanced perspectives on human-centric stories that are hard to find in international media. Sometimes these are social issues, news events, and trends in the Chinese society that are neglected, underreported, and/or stereotyped in the international media. So if we go to the next slide, I think I have a screenshot in it. So for example, in our November 2021 issue, there was this video about a school in the northeastern region of China that teaches adults drinking table etiquettes, as you can see. So the context to this story is that the culture of toxic drinking has been quite prevalent in China. And last year, there was a rape accusation by a female employee of the e-commerce giant Alibaba, who had to participate in a work drinking session. And that renewed a debate about the Me Too movement in China and toxic drinking culture. So this story doesn't necessarily focus on the news event itself, but instead it poses an important question about the fact that not everyone in China is naturally good at drinking. So how does ordinary business people try to fit in this toxic culture when they just cannot? We thought that the story, although it didn't have immediate strong newsworthiness, but it really touches upon an important social issue, and the angle of the story is really interesting for both Chinese audience as well as international audience. And then for Q&A issue, if we can go to the next slide. Yes. So for Q&A issue, we are interested in stories of aspiring Chinese artists like Yan has introduced, as well as grassroots initiatives that enable non-professionals to practice visual art. And we have some ideas that we wanted to follow, but we are hoping to roll them out down the year. And especially if you ever check out our newsletter, you will see that this year we have launched 2 special issues that we were actually pretty proud to put out, even though we were all kind of like working under other conditions, like working full-time, working as a student, etc. But we managed to put out a few quite timely special issues on either evolving social issues or breaking news scenarios. And in those, so Yan will talk about those special issues later on when we get to her part, because the special issues mostly touch upon visual art on social media. And I think this is it about the newsletter, and we really encourage you to sign up to our newsletter, and we hope to see you around as in our subscriber.
And just to kind of ask a question before we go on to Charlotte there, this is a project that you, as you say, you do on top of other work that you're doing. So Beimeng, you're working full-time at Six Tone, correct? And yes. I know that Charlotte and Yan are also working full-time. So this is like a passion project on top of everything else for you.
Yes.
And why did you choose, as a question for all of you, why did you choose Substack as a platform for this? I think there's a general trend within journalism. I mean, a few years ago, of course, blogging was quite large. That seems to have declined, people blogging on their own sites. And a lot of individual journalists, particularly in North America, moved to Substack. But what attracted you about Substack as a platform?
I think Charlotte has more to say on that.
Yeah, I originally planned to show a slide about it, and then I decided against it because of time issue. But I think it's very interesting because we did this column for a while for American media outlet, and also it was synchronized on WordPress for the Witness. But then we had a break for some time. And at the beginning of the pandemic, Substack, a lot of journalists and writers were moving to Substack because the job market in the journalism industry was just not doing so great. So a lot of people moved there to become independent and also to have more control of their work. And I think that was a similar consideration for us as well. We just thought, okay, if we're gonna continue to do this, let's just do it on our own terms. And I think that really fits our mission as well, because we don't really want to, find another publication that has certain kind of editorial kind of lens in which it views China, so we have more freedom. in selecting whatever we feel that it's most compelling to us as 3 Chinese women who have lived in different places. Yeah, I think it's really, it kind of helps us to preserve our work, and it also, like with Substack, we can just experiment with different platforms, and we can see who exactly are our audiences, and we are, you know, also on social media, on Twitter, interacting with our readers. So it just gives us more sense and also more fulfillment in doing this work.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody has anything to add. If not, then I will go ahead to the next section here.
I do see Sharon had posing a question already. So do we want to answer that before we start sharing about photography, video and stuff?
Well, let's talk about, Charlotte, you go ahead on photography. We'll drop Sharon's question in at the end of that section, because I think it's about the sources of talent in China. I think it will fit well there. And just a reminder to people in the audience, yes, please ask questions, drop them in the Q&A box. We'll bring those in at various points, or we'll come to them at the end. Charlotte.
Great. Yes, so we will be speaking about the state of Chinese visual storytelling, starting with photography, what's going on in the photojournalism and documentary photography industry. And then Beimeng is going to show you some video works, and Yan in the end is going to talk about the role visuals play on social media when traditional media face a lot of challenges. So as Beimeng just mentioned, she showed you a couple of media outlets that we frequently select work from. And I just want to go a little bit deeper about that to explain a little bit more about the Chinese visual media landscape before showing specific work, because that will help you understand throughout the presentation what we're talking about. So contrary to what you see on Twitter, where most media coming from China are slapped with this warning, state-affiliated media, the Chinese media landscape is much more complex. So Twitter defines this state-affiliated media as outlets where the state exercises control over editorial content through financial resources, direct or indirect political pressures, and or control over production or distribution. This definition is so broad that it covers literally every media or even every person living in China, because at the end of the day, there's always some direct or indirect pressure or censors that we face. So in China, there are state media founded by the government. There are commercial media like Caixin or Iron Factory that Beimeng just showed, that rely on advertising revenues and very market driven. And there are news portals run by well-funded internet companies such as Tencent. And they all have to be overseen by the government, but the degree of how much independence they have vary greatly. So even within state media, state-backed media, you have some that are completely, they're just government mouthpieces. And then you have some outlets, you know, that are financed by the government, but have a really rigorous team of journalists who do a lot of original reporting and enjoy much better freedom. So when we began the work 5-6 years ago, we would see tons of good visual stories published on news portals run by Tencent, Sohu, NetEase, these internet giants that have a lot of money, as well as by commercial media. And they employed many staff photographers and were constantly publishing breaking news stories, reportage, photo essays. But the last 2-3 years, we have seen a drastic decrease of the coverage. I mean, one reason is that, of course, a lot of the photographers are moving to videos because video is the thing now. Another thing is that, I mean, maybe because of that, and outlets have cut their staff positions, and some of them have pushed out their staff photographers and visual storytellers to form studios, and which then they contribute the content back to their old employers as freelancers or as to other media. And then there's also this trend called self-media, where you can just register your own account in news portal's website and just, you know, publish any story, and then maybe the only viral ones or the better stories are picked up by the editors, and you will get some compensation. And also, the majority of Chinese today are using their phones to access information. So you have generations like my mom, who's very adept at using their phones, but not good at computers at all. So this has a huge impact on photography. Now, the majority of news outlets are mobile. They use WeChat public accounts to publish their stories. So WeChat is by this internet giant Tencent. It's our all-in-one social media app, and public accounts are like one blog, like a blog on this platform. So you can imagine on social media, people care less about the quality of visuals, and a lot of the outlets that publish a lot of photo essays traditionally, they're now like on WeChat more than happy with the snapshot, you know, in the story by an amateur photographer found on the internet or provided by the interview subject. So I would say the quality has gone down a little bit, but despite these difficult circumstances, there are still a lot of photographers who are still very dedicated to their craft, and some even found new ways within the bounds of WeChat to tell their stories. I will give one example. Yeah, great. Yes, so this is a work by photographer Zhou Pinglang. It's a portrait of a city, which is Shanghai, along its subway lines. And so this is a recording of the screen as seen on your phone, but I rotated the screen. Because in the age of cell phones, it posed a big challenge for a lot of photographers because vertical photos are better for the screen, and it's so different from how we were taught to shoot in school. But this photographer, he and his editor found a way to preserve the horizontal images and also highlight them on WeChat. So he went out and gathered a lot of materials along Shanghai subway lines, the people, you know, the mood in the city, and he and his editors made this like put together this layout, which requires people to view to rotate their phone and see the article horizontally, which we really think that really fits well for the story, because the story is not linear, it's not a narrative-driven story, and they use collage, they laid out the photos very creatively, so you have way more possibilities in telling the story. And you will see a little bit of text in between in larger fonts to kind of tell you just a little bit of background, you know, how it feels and what's the context you're looking at. And Zhou Pinglang is a really, really good photographer who's been at this job for a decade or more than that.
And Charlotte, do you have any sense about how well viewed or how popular a story like that might be? Is it reaching a small audience, a large audience? How is that going on WeChat?
It's a little bit hard to say. I'd say this publication, Paike, I think it's affiliated with a very big newspaper, so it might attract a big audience, but at least in the photojournalism group, I think that was well circulated as something like a wow factor.
Yeah.
That was something really new. And next, we have a project from photographer Zhu Lingyu, we do the names, like we do our family name first. So sometimes you see it different here. So she is a freelance photographer, and in this project, she collaborated with sexual assault and rape survivors to tell their own stories. So with each survivor, she worked with them on how they wanted to be photographed and interviewed them and let them tell their stories in a first person narrative in the text. So some people don't want to show their faces, so she avoided photographing their faces at all. But then some, she found really creative ways to photograph them, which is also very fitting to the character's personal story. For example, this man, he's a 43-year-old pantomime actor, silent actor, and when he was 12, he was drugged and raped on going home from school. And so that day it was raining, his mother didn't bother to pick him up, and after this rape, his relationship with his family just worsened, and he felt abandoned, and he developed a strong distrust of others, and sometimes other people probably, you know, see him as very strange, as some kind of freak. So this image is really this photographer and this man collaborated together and create these images that it's really, really personal. You see on the streets, people looking at him kind of strangely curious about, like, you know, what is this guy about? And him being there sort of like feeling shy from the crowd. We felt it's really, really strong work, and this project I think is still ongoing. And next, we have a very beautifully executed project about China's collective villages by photographer Yan Cong. So after China opened up in the 1980s and embraced the market economy, collectivization was pretty much over. But there are still some villages that held on to the collective economy, where every resident is entitled to a job and housing and has stakes in the factories or businesses owned by their town. And some of these villages are actually really well off, as you can see from this collage. So this is, I think, a township called Huaxi in Jiangsu province, and this is in the town's hotel. And the town actually has a really big tourism industry, because tourists from all over China come here to kind of see the ideal version of, you know, how communism, or at least in China, was supposed to be. And so his photographs, the style, I think, really speak to the nostalgia surrounding the ideals that once dominated the country. And actually, some of these young residents of these villages feel kind of out of place in China, where capitalism is in full force, and they felt like they're living in a time capsule of sort. And the next project is a enterprise project by photographer Wu Huiyuan. It's a 4-part series published in June 2020, which looked at the pandemic's impact on China's clothing manufacturing hub in Guangzhou. And at that time, the first wave of virus came under control in China, and travel restrictions eased within the country. So a lot of garment workers rushed back to their factories to find work, but only to find business that had shrunk, because internationally, the pandemic was still raging. A lot of other countries were still in lockdown and shops were shut. So there was a little demand. In this series, Wu Huiyuan and his colleague told the stories of several individuals. So here is a factory boss who's struggling to find enough orders to keep his factory open. And then he photographed some others, factory workers who were struggling to find work. And we really liked the series when it was published because the photographer was able to tell these different personal stories from different angles, and they all came together to illustrate the struggling economy. And this year we're in the third year of the pandemic, and China is still sticking with the zero COVID policy. So people are naturally very worried about the economy. And because China's media space has shrunk from last year to this year, and so we almost saw no coverage this year that go to businesses and to illustrate the struggling economy. And frankly, a lot of big news events that happened this year, we haven't seen coverage because journalists are restricted access. Or not, like all the stories are only allowed to be told in a certain way. So the last picture I wanted to show in this section is this picture about Shanghai lockdown. So this spring, 26 million residents of Shanghai were locked down for 2 months. And because movements were restricted and shops were not open, people were struggling to have enough food, people couldn't get to the hospitals, people were struggling to get medicines. But we saw very few photo stories from reputable media outlets because first, journalists from other parts of China, they couldn't go to Shanghai because the city was under lockdown. And then most journalists in Shanghai, they were also under quarantine at home. Beimeng experienced this herself, and in Shanghai at that time, people who tested positive for COVID, even with mild symptoms or no symptoms, they had to be sent to Fangcang, which were this hastily constructed quarantine centers or hospitals. So there were tons of photos and videos online on social media about how bad the quarantine centers were thousands of people have to share a few toilets and leaking roofs and so, but we do not really see that in coverage. So, and this photograph here is one of the few images taken by professional photographers from inside the quarantine centers. This author, Lai Xinling, is a photographer from the Liberation Daily, the official newspaper of the Shanghai Communist Party. So he received this rare access to the quarantine center. And so the story he published showed a much more organized and calm side of the quarantine centers in contrast to what you see on social media. And this photographer, in an interview, he acknowledged the difficulties patients encountered, but he didn't really show the images. And so what he showed in the end was very routine, a little bit encouraging almost. So this sparked a debate in the industry because some critics say, this coverage is propaganda. And then there are many photographers who defended him because they say this work is still valuable and we need more understanding and tolerance in this media environment. And people say that he probably took more photos because, but he could only share so much currently. And it's better that he took them now rather than nothing. So that maybe when the media environment gets better, he can publish the other ones as well. So this raises very interesting questions for visual journalists operating in a restricted media environment, which is, should they take advantage of this rare access in exchange for positive coverage, because otherwise no one will be there to bear witness. But then there's also the other question, how far can one compromise before the work is, you can no longer say the work is a journalism. So this is an interesting question for many photographers in China right now.
So should we go on to your video? Yes.
Okay. I might think of more points to that, and I might add later when we are in our Q&As. So okay, with video, I'd love to first play you the opening of a short doc that I made myself last year. So it's I'm just gonna be able to play you the opening to it. It's a 10-minute, 10, 12, 13-minute video. And I'm just gonna be playing the first minute. And so the story is about a woman's search for her missing husband who were last seen in a flooded subway tunnel in central China. And I'm not sure if you remember seeing this in the news last year, but we believe it made international headlines back then. So Yan, could you please play the video? Thank you.
刚开始信息不通畅的时候，我都不知道他被水冲走了，我以为他只是被救出，或者送到医院，或者到安置。所有的核查他的信息都没有他的同事都去太平间，到目前为止就是只有这里没有，还没有搜救。
Okay, so and after that, I'll have Yan directly play the second video to the same news event that my coworker put out. It's a explainer video, very different from the more news talk style video that I just played you, and it's also just the opening. Go ahead.
Late on July 20th, distressing videos started appearing on Chinese social media.
现在困在地铁里边了，那水地铁里边已经到腰了。
We are hearing the desperate calls for help from people in Zhengzhou, a megacity in central China, experiencing torrential rainfall.
打电话给俺三姨，叫俺三姨报警。
The people are commuters trapped in a flooded subway train. More than 500 people on board. For over 3 hours, the passengers were stuck inside the carriage as they rapidly filled with water and ran out of air. 14 passengers were later confirmed dead by the authorities. Their train home had turned into death trap. It wasn't the first subway flood to make global headlines this summer, but it was the most devastating one. What exactly happened that night? We analyzed the timeline of events on July 20th to understand how the tragedy unfolded.
Yeah, it's a very heavy story from last year. And the bigger context to it is that, so China, as a vast country, floodings happen almost every year. Even this year, there is a lot of things going on in the southern part of the country. But last year, in central China, more than I think 300 people died in the province of Henan because of this rainfall and the following flooding. And so we, as a small team, we were only able to focus on this one incident, one tragedy on the subway. And with our text team, the other reporters wrote more stories to that. So I decided to show you these two pieces of videos because I thought it's a good example of a really, really rare access that my team and other Chinese other Chinese journalists were granted last year in terms of, reporting trip approval, treatment at the scene by authorities, access to the subjects, and the final publishing of the stories. So along each step of the way, there were a lot of intricate lines to walk, and still the access was only partial. But many people saw the coverage as making an impact to have led to China's State Council into an investigation into what went wrong beyond the fact that it was initiated as a natural disaster. And I believe this pair of videos do a decent job at contextualizing and showing the human toll of the tragedy. They are very different in nature. With my video, we got this. We got like a record of the, of some of the last chat history between the wife and the husband. So she shared that with us, and we were able to, it was really moving and really captured their relationship. And we decided to incorporate that into the video as a major thread. And so in general, when we talk about industry trends in terms of video journalism, I would say that video journalists face similar issues as photographers, with issues like budget cuts and deprioritizing quality and originality. And so first, newsrooms shift from investing in quality and impact to traffic and business values, while lighthearted social native stories that are much less time consuming to produce or churn out piece after piece, while social media algorithm discriminates against longer, heavier news videos. I think this is a universal issue. And also in China, the lack of a clear career ladder within the video journalism industry means a much shorter career span for video makers. But I don't think it's necessarily always a bad thing, because in my observation, many people end up actually moving into, for example, independent filmmaking and winning awards and stuff like that. So those allowed more room for self or more critical expression, also, but at the expense of likely financial hardship without stable income. There are also quite a number of people leaving the country that we personally know to pursue journalism elsewhere, or leaving journalism altogether. I think this is also quite universal, but it's more exacerbated in China. Then there is less and less room for serious journalism to survive in an environment ripe for report culture. For example, there's this popular science explainer video team called Paperclip that our China File column used to feature quite a lot, but they used to do very informative and very well animated explainers on issues ranging from COVID to deforestation in the Amazons. But it was shut down last year after nationalist bloggers weaponized censorship and repeatedly reported their content to social platforms such as Weibo and Bilibili, and those are both very big, popular social platforms in China, and also to government agencies, saying that their content was for some reason anti-China, and so when I talk about foreign journalists' treatment when they were covering the flooding in Henan last year, I think it also so the flooding itself made international headline, as well as the harassment against the harassment by angry crowd against foreign journalists traveling into the region to report the news. So they were accused of negative portrayals of China, and I think that incident itself also received wide international coverage. Yeah, and it was quite negative. And when Shanghai went through a 2-month lockdown in April and May, in my personal observation, very few reporters from specific outlets were let out of their residential buildings to document what was going on in an empty city. And I think even fewer than those who went to Wuhan or who were allowed out of their residential compounds in Wuhan when COVID initially broke out in the city in the end of 2019. So the screenshot in the right lower corner here that I'm sharing here is of a short documentary series by Shanghai Daily that focus more on the rescue missions and people's resilience during the lockdown. For example, there were so during the 2 months lockdown in Shanghai, it was close to impossible to leave to hop on a train or flight to leave the city and get back or go to where one wants to go. And so many people who didn't really have a place to stay in Shanghai or for any reason were stranded in places like subways, train stations, etc. And so one of the episodes in the series was shot right in a train station, and I interviewed people who were stranded there about their experiences and about them actually being able to leave the city. And so the interesting thing about this series is that I actually don't know how well it was received on non-Chinese social media outlets that that Shanghai Daily was set up to target as a state media or propaganda publication, but it was published within WeChat, within their public account or their video channel inside WeChat, and that was really, really well received by local, even like Chinese Mandarin speaking audience, because it's video and it's if you speak the language, you don't have to. It's not exactly English content, right? So I find that quite interesting, and yeah.
So that was the example of one going from being made for an English audience and then translating into Chinese social media.
It wasn't even translated. It was published inside WeChat, right? With its English subtitles.
Not officially translated line by line, but one that sort of was transferred, I think, from the English audience into Chinese social media.
Right. Because so I think Yan's gonna be talking about another social only video that went quite viral during the Shanghai lockdown, and explain a little bit about why that particular video kind of reached that status. But my observation is that this video kind of held a similar role as the other video that Yan is gonna talk about here, because so it focuses on a more kind of like how to say, more constructive angle, right? Like rescue missions, like emergency medical service, and then like people actually reaching their destinations or reaching the goals that they originally had. So that's a little bit, it's a really fine line. And still, that's some of the most critical stuff that we're actually able to get out. So people naturally react to that because people's, it has been a pretty emotional time here in Shanghai that I can see from everyone that I meet on the street, on the bus, in restaurants, everywhere. Yeah.
I think we need to keep a little eye on the time. So it might be a good idea to move towards Yan and to talk about social media, if that's okay.
Definitely. If so, I will just show you the next slide a little bit. I won't talk about it at all, but this video is made by this another video, this other video explainer publisher called DX Channel, and they're also based here. They aren't banned yet, and they produce really good content. And I really urge you to follow their updates, their uploads, because they really do some fascinating stuff. Sorry for really taking too much time here, and I'll hand it over to Yan.
So now, after Beimeng and Charlotte have talked about photojournalism and video journalism, I will talk more broadly about just news-related images on social media and their relations to visual journalism. And as Charlotte and Beimeng have already discussed, I think social media offered a lot of challenges, but also opportunities for professional journalists. For example, the WeChat public account allows for very creative photo editing, including the fact that we're using a smaller device, allows for the editing process to ask users to just rotate their device to look at their phone horizontally. And also social media has all these user-generated footage that can be used creatively for video journalism. For my part, I want to shift our focus a little bit, and I would like to situate news image as part of the internet visual culture, which you can see here, that I think appropriating, remixing, and sharing and circulating has always been part of the internet visual culture. And as visual journalism moves more and more digitally or online, we are now kind of part of this larger internet visual culture. So instead of thinking the audience as passive receivers of who just consume visual stories produced by professional journalists, I think it might be more helpful to focus on how the audience actively participate in circulating or even remixing and editing and sharing the images on social media, especially in terms of news events. So here I have 3 examples. Each of them shows very different aspects of that on social media in China. So first one is this news image that later got the title, "The Woman with the Bouquet." It was first photographed by photographer Ding Gang from Caixin, which is this very well-known independent or commercial magazine in China. It was photographed last year when China shut down its Bitcoin mining, all the Bitcoin mines in different parts of the country. And in this photo, the woman is, she's a Tibetan woman who was helping to transport Bitcoin mining machines that were uninstalled. And this image kind of resembled a little bit of like oil painting from like an impressionist oil painting. And the fact that she's holding a batch of cables feels like she's holding a bouquet. So it really broke the internet, especially among the NFT and Bitcoin circles. And here on the right, we can see this is a screenshot from OpenSea, one of the NFT art platform. People immediately minted this image as NFT on OpenSea. And here in the description, this photo is called Legendary. And then here, a lot of people also just made derivative version of that image since it's legendary. As we can see that on the right, these are basically just versions generated through some AI filters. And when we were writing about this phenomenon last year, at the time, the most expensive NFT of this image on OpenSea was listed as more than 200 Ethereum, which at the time was almost 700,000 US dollar. So I think this is especially very interesting because all of these happened without the consent of the photographer or the consent of the news publication. Another thing is we're not sure if any of these were sold, or at least when I was making this presentation, this 200 Ethereum NFT was still listed as like not being circulated by other people. So I think this might have posed a question as much about NFT as about digital imagery or to photographers at large, that what does it mean to our copyrights to images, and also the different ways to monetize your image now that there's this new technology available. And then moving on next, I want to show you the story about the chained woman, which we briefly mentioned earlier. This is a story that we wrote about in one of our special issues in the newsletter. It all started from a TikTok video that was supposed to be just a group of charity volunteers visiting a rural village in China that was poor and also received some donations from this group. But accidentally, this in their TikTok video, they showed this woman who was chained to a shack in her home. And people also found out that she's a mother of 8 children. And also they tried to talk to her, but no one could understand what she was saying. So as this video and the story about this woman was circulating on social media, people started asking all types of questions, whether she was trafficked into a forced marriage, how come she had 8 children, because one-child policy was only abolished a few years ago, and also whether she has mental illness that led to other people taking advantage of her. And because this story was so controversial that most of the Chinese media were banned from covering this event. And that's also why there's almost none like traditional kind of news imagery, like visual journalism coverage on this story. But social media users kind of just took it in their own hands. For example, here they used the photo of this woman, basically a screenshot from the video, it's almost like an open source intelligence kind of research, where they found another database of missing women and started comparing this chained woman's photo with another missing woman's photo to try to arrive at their own conclusion if they're the same person, and also using this as a way to pressure the authority to hold them accountable, asking them to step in to investigate on this case, since most of the Chinese media were absent on covering this. And then another thing that was very interesting was that because this story was circulated so much, a lot of people really picked up on the motive of the chain or the woman's face when they are creating other types of art, just to keep the social media's attention on this story. So on March 8th, which is the International Women's Day, the illustration artist Tango created this illustration which uses the chain to resemble number 8 in the date. Or also here on the archival website, China Digital Time, you can see there's this image of the woman, but created in the chain. I think this story is, for us, is very special because it provoked so much outrage, and also was able to sustain the attention solely by social media users circulating the story, and also constantly creating new work. And also those work are constantly being censored and then more and more new work came out to sustain that attention. And also it's, we should know that this topic is, it really, it was only, how to put it, it's only interesting to a certain group of people. It's people who are interested in women's issue, it's people who are interested in trafficking, forced marriage, mental illness, one-child policy. So it's not the entire social media is talking about this thing. So, so this further highlights that small group of people who really cared about it and their group effort to keep this conversation going so that more stakeholders can actually step in and present what's the actual story about this woman and what actually happened behind this family. And here is the last example for this case. It's this woman's image become a mural on a building. So I think this really shows how an image circulating online can eventually land offline, but then also come back online when the photo was, the mural was made into an image that came back on Weibo, which is the Twitter equivalent in China. So I think in this example, it's really how the different strategies that the social media users use in creating new visuals and in sharing, reposting, and circulating these visuals, that was very, very powerful to us. And my last example is this video called "The Voice of April," which is also which came out of the Shanghai lockdown, which Beimeng just now has already talked about a lot. So I just want to show you very briefly this video.
我现在告诉你一个事实，就是病房很紧张，隔离点没有房间，120没有车，这个是事实。现在嘛，让我通知人家阳性，健康云上嘛是个阴性，我们都让人家打12345投诉健康云，搞什么搞嘛？
现在连上海发布微博上面都关闭评论了。
今天早晨4点多钟就来了，到现在都几。
I think we probably get a pretty good sense of what this video is about. It's created by a Shanghai-based filmmaker. I don't think they are a professional journalist, but we also don't know who they actually are. The video is basically a compilation of different snippets of audio collected throughout April while Shanghai was during lockdown, and the visual of the video is mostly this type of drone footage of Shanghai urban landscape. And it's quite powerful because in 6 minutes, it kind of takes you through this journey of what different people's experience. I think even in the very short 30 seconds we listen to you know, babies being born in hospital, and truck drivers got stranded and people trying to get help, but officials are also very frustrated. So when this video was first shared on WeChat, a lot of people thought it was a very objective and neutral depiction of what actually happened in April in Shanghai. And the filmmaker also provided a download link to the video in the hope that if people want to just preserve this video, they can actually save a copy in their devices. But soon the video was censored on WeChat, and that really angered a lot of people, thinking that, you know, for censor to delete such a neutral and harmless video, the censors are being very unreasonable. So that prompted people sorry, that prompted people to do all kinds of editing on the video. For example, this one, we can see it's the video completely mirrored. So different types of editing that will basically make the video unrecognizable, well, to some level, unrecognizable to human or AI sensors. And I will show you a little bit more. I'll show you more examples. So here, basically that day, my entire WeChat timeline is filled by this video and this video alone. And here you can see that some people rotated the video, some people blurred the video, and some people just added some other random video in front of that video, so it will generate a different thumbnail. I think this one is quite different from the chained woman case, because in this case, everyone was talking about it. Everyone was sharing the video. But at the same time, if you think about it, when everyone's sharing this video, it means everyone has already seen it. But so the point of sharing this video and also all these different versions of video is not really about keeping this information alive, because if everyone has seen it, what's the point of continue circulating it? So I would like to argue that in this case, it's less about what's in the video, but more of sharing or editing and sharing as a gesture. And there can be very complicated emotions behind this action. So it could be like a lot of people are just very frustrated by the censors being unreasonable to take down this kind of harmless content. And it could also be that a lot of people did feel that the video represent their confusion about how badly Shanghai handled the lockdown. And I also think there are a lot of playfulness in this action. You know, it is quite rebellious to do this kind of thing, to play against the censor, but also in a very safe way, because you know everyone else around you is doing it. So there's definitely not, and also this is quite harmless. There's not going to, it's also not subversive to begin with. So this is also a very safe way to just play with the censor.
It's a very good example of how the desire to censor actually spreads the video further with
exactly
creative responses.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think a lot of people would say, like, you know, there are a lot of news that if they're not censored, no one will read it. But as soon as it's censored, they get very curious and want to know what's actually in the news.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is like the extreme case where people kind of just jump on it, and yeah. But this is also not to make it sound like. Not to make censorship sound like this kind of partying or make it sound lightly, but I do think that in this very specific case, or in a lot of these kind of reaction to censorship, I think there's one part of it is about the circulation of the information, but then we should also think about what's driven people to actually share it. There's a lot of like emotions and affects that's not really rational about this news is so important that we just have to keep it alive. I think this is what differentiates from the previous chained woman case quite. This is what made them very different.
I think that's a really important point. I know there are a lot of social media researchers in North America who are talking about that sort of approach, that sharing is not about information, sharing is about emotion, and you're giving an indication about emotions and passions and desires and so on, rather than specific points that you want to get across. It still makes it very culturally significant, but for different reasons.
Yeah, for sure. So basically these are the examples that I want to talk about, and just tying it back to the challenges that journalists are faced with, in terms of access and restrictions. I think, here these examples sometimes show that if you think about users as more active participants, they can also generate so much content, but not necessarily abiding to the ethics or standards that journalists hold very tightly and close to us. I think, but then it also opened up a chance for us to think about how to engage with the audience more meaningfully, right? So instead of thinking of audiences like they just give us clicks and views that will generate advertisement profits, there are definitely more ways to engage with the audience. And also without painting too bleak of a picture, I hope what we talked about, especially with all the challenges and difficulties that journalists in China are operating in, we hope that can help us appreciate even more of the great work that are coming out of China nowadays.
I think you've all done a fantastic job on that. And I think that's really, for me, the takeaway point. I'll be interested in what other people think. Although we're coming towards the end of our time, we still have time for a couple of questions, and we'll take a couple of questions. But I'm always amazed about all the challenges that you've described, all the constraints you've described, but at the same time, the incredible creativity that exists in those spaces in response to those challenges and so on. The Chinese space always seems very vibrant to me. At least as, if not more vibrant than Europe and North America. That's a big generalization, see what people think. But and also I think that you've shown us across news journalism, photography, video, social media responses, the richness of the entire visual landscape. I mean, it's an incredible insight, so thank you for that. We do have a couple of questions, and there is time for people to drop a couple more in. Aki was asking earlier on that, in essence, your work and the newsletter in particular is about combating stereotypes and so on. What do you think are the worst stereotypes about China that you would like to combat, that you would like to challenge?
Whoa. There are so many.
Yeah.
I think for me, like, this is from my personal experience that I went to study in the US after I graduated high school in China. And I studied journalism, and I was really, trying really hard to learn English, to write in English. So I was only focusing on reading American publications on their coverage about China. And then I would go home and feel that there is a sort of gap between what you read in the newspapers and what you really experience on the ground. I think on the ground there is so much more humanity that are not being talked about in international coverage. I mean, some of it is just how news media is designed. It has a critical lens. I think usually international media, you often see this binary portray of China. You see the big bad government, and then you see small people who are trying to defend that, or their home gets demolished and stuff like that. There is much more in between. But I guess, unfortunately, because our media space is shrinking, like, there is also fewer chances for Chinese storytellers to really go out and combat that stereotype. And of course, you have the language barrier, and you have the travel barriers. Like not all Chinese can so easily travel abroad and go to international, festivals to meet with editors. That's just the fact that makes sort of isolated from the world.
And those festivals have not been running for the last couple of years anyway, so
that's true.
So that's added to the problem in that sense. So final question, which is from Mike, is that on the one hand, there's a lot of work in China, and if you look at World Press Photo Awards, a lot of entries from Chinese photographers in World Press Photo Awards, for example. But your newsletter is calling attention to the fact that there's a lack of awareness about new work and good work coming out of China. I mean, what do you think is the reason for that sort of lack of awareness? And in addition to what you're doing on the newsletter, what could be done to increase that awareness of new and good work coming out of China? Mike always asks the small questions. So,
I mean, I can say a little bit about that. So I think several years ago, I actually wrote an article about how many Chinese photographers, even amateurs, are entering into World Press Photo because it's so highly regarded in China. It's like winning the Olympics for them.
Yeah.
But now I think maybe there are fewer photographers, but we do have photographers that we cover who work for this media outlets that we follow. They have won World Press Photo recently in video and in still images. Our colleagues who work hard every day. But if you talk in the international level, I don't think any photo editors internationally would recognize their name or want to really hire them. So winning World Press Photo, I think, because the context, when the jurors judge the context, you don't see the name, so you judge by the work. So this is a testament to how good the Chinese photographers' work is, but at the same time, it doesn't really get them more exposure.
In terms of being picked up by international media to do new work.
Right, yeah. And you feel like they are still, sort of speaking to themselves in a way.
Any thoughts on how that might change? I guess it's about making photo editors more aware, perhaps, but what else could be done to make better connections to those sorts of photographers doing good work?
I mean, yeah, making photo editors more aware, but no, now it's also not so easy for Chinese photographers to photograph international media. So it's just very, very difficult situation. I think my hope is that our situation would get better and there would be more communication, because right now the China and the world, especially China between the US and China with Europe, it's not really, the political situation is not great, the relationship's not great, there's a lot of suspicion between countries. So our only hope is that the situation is going to ease, that we have more creative freedom and photographers can travel more to get themselves known. And I don't know if you two have something to add.
Well, I think that brings us towards the end of our time, actually. It's been a fantastic presentation and discussion. I actually think that if one thing is going to help connect Chinese photographers to the world, it's going to be your newsletter, quite seriously. I think that you have, I'm not just saying that because you're here, but I think you have the opportunity to present work and connect it to people. So I hope today has made the newsletter people aware of that. I know you got at least one subscriber I saw in the chat. There'll probably be some more today, which will be great. And I know that we're looking forward to doing some more work together and publishing some things on the 7 Insider blog, which will be really good. And we'll keep making those connections. But I want to thank all three of you for a great presentation today. Thank people in the audience for coming. We'll have this recording up live in about recording on site in about a week or so. And we look forward to a continuing conversation.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for the invitation, for the moderation, for the very interesting questions that you posed. And thanks for everybody in the audience.
We'll see you guys later.
Thank you so much for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. It was a pleasure.